My name is Mason, a 32-year-old software engineer living in Seattle. I always knew my relationship with my traditional parents was complicated, but nothing prepared me for that Thanksgiving bombshell. They proudly announced giving my brother Darren $156,000 for his house down payment. When I asked about my future, Dad said I was too ambitious for a woman and should focus on finding a husband instead. One problem though, I am a man. Like, subscribe, and let me know where you are watching from as I share how I discovered what real family support means. Growing up in suburban Chicago with my parents and brother was like living in a time capsule from the 1950s. Our modest two-story home was a monument to traditional values that my father Harold worshipped with religious devotion. At 65, Dad spent most of his life as a factory manager, climbing the ranks through sheer determination and an unwavering belief that men were meant to provide while women kept house. His salt and pepper hair and permanent scowl were as much a part of his identity as his rigid worldviews. My mother Sandra, now 62, embodied the perfect complementary piece to his traditional puzzle. A homemaker who never pursued education beyond high school, she dedicated her life to maintaining our household, preparing meals precisely at 6 each evening, and most importantly, following Dad's lead in all family decisions. Her soft voice and tendency to start sentences with phrases like, "Maybe we should," or "Your father thinks," established early on who truly made the rules in our home. Then there was my brother Darren, 3 years older at 35, who became the blueprint for what my parents considered success. Darren followed the conventional life script to the letter, married his high school sweetheart, Amy, by 23, secured a stable but unambitious accounting job at a local firm, bought a starter home in the same neighborhood as our parents, and produced 2 grandchildren on schedule. His predictability was his superpower in our family dynamic. I, however, was the family anomaly. From early childhood, I questioned everything from why the sky was blue to why Mom never disagreed with Dad at dinner. My curiosity extended beyond science into deeper questions about why our family operated the way it did. This intellectual curiosity was initially cute when I was 5, became concerning when I was 10, and transformed into a family crisis by the time I reached high school. The earliest memory of this divide came during a 3rd-grade parent-teacher conference. My teacher, Mrs. Garcia, enthusiastically described my exceptional academic performance and suggested advanced placement programs. While most parents would beam with pride, I remember Dad shifting uncomfortably in his chair. "You sure he is not just showing off?" Dad asked, glancing at Mom, who nodded in agreement. "He needs to learn teamwork more than being the smartest kid in the room." Meanwhile, Darren struggled through basic math but excelled at football, which earned him endless praise at dinner tables and family gatherings. Dad purchased expensive sports equipment without hesitation, while my requests for science camp were met with lectures about frivolous spending. College preparation highlighted our divergent paths even further. When Darren decided to attend the local state university, my parents liquidated investments to cover his tuition, room board, and spending money. His mediocre grades were dismissed as him focusing on the social aspects of education, which Dad insisted were more important for real-world success than book smarts. When my acceptance letter from Washington University arrived with a partial scholarship, the response was lukewarm at best. "That is awful far away," Mason, Mom said, twisting her dish towel nervously. "And even with that scholarship, the rest is so expensive." Dad was more direct. "We already spent our education fund on your brother. You will need to figure it out yourself if you insist on going all the way out there." I did figure it out. Working 20 hours weekly at the campus bookstore, taking summer jobs, applying for every scholarship available, and graduating with honors despite the exhausting schedule. My parents attended my graduation, but their half-hearted congratulations felt perfunctory compared to the party they threw when Darren completed his 5-year degree plan with a 2.7 GPA. After college, I accepted a junior developer position at a tech firm in Seattle, putting 3,000 miles between me and the constant reminder of my second-place status in the family hierarchy. The distance provided perspective, and my career flourished in an environment that valued my analytical mind and work ethic. Within 5 years, I had tripled my starting salary, built a substantial savings account, and created a life surrounded by friends who appreciated me for exactly who I was. Despite the geographical and emotional distance, I maintained regular contact with my family. weekly phone calls with Mom, monthly video chats with both parents, and the obligatory holiday visits. 3 years into my career, when Dad experienced heart problems requiring surgery, I immediately offered financial support to help with medical bills insurance would not cover. This evolved into a monthly contribution of $300 that continued long after his recovery, justified as helping with retirement expenses. I genuinely believed that my success might eventually earn their respect, that financial contribution might translate to emotional validation. Every promotion I shared, every bonus I mentioned, was met with the same tepid response variations of, "That is nice, but when are you going to settle down?" or "You work too much." This continued disappointment became background radiation in my life, steady, expected, and something I learned to live with while building my own success story elsewhere. The stage was set for the devastating Thanksgiving revelation that would finally force me to confront the painful truth about my place in our family system. Last Thanksgiving marked the first time I had returned to Chicago in nearly 8 months. My flight landed amid a typical Midwest November chill, and I arrived at my childhood home with a carefully selected bottle of wine and modest expectations for the weekend. The familiar scent of turkey and cinnamon greeted me, along with Mom's perfunctory hug and Dad's firm handshake. Darren and his wife, Amy, arrived shortly after with their children, 7-year-old Emma and 5-year-old Jacob, who barely recognized their Uncle Mason from the obligatory video calls. The initial hour passed with standard small talk about weather, travel, and superficial updates from everyone's lives. I shared news about my recent project leadership promotion, which received the usual polite nods before conversation quickly shifted to Emma's soccer achievements. Dinner proceeded according to tradition, with Dad carving the turkey, while making the same jokes he had recycled for 20-plus Thanksgivings. We settled into our assigned seats, mine always to the left of Mom, never at the head of the table, a position reserved for Dad, or occasionally Darren when Dad wanted to emphasize his heir apparent status. Midway through the meal, Darren cleared his throat with unusual ceremony, glancing at Amy, who nodded encouragingly. "We have some exciting news to share," Darren announced, his face flushed with pride. "We just closed on a new house in Lincoln Park." The table erupted in congratulations. Mom clapped her hands in delight while Dad beamed with unmistakable pride. "It is a beautiful 4-bedroom colonial," Amy added. "Perfect for the kids and with room to grow our family." Dad raised his glass in toast. "To your new home. Your mother and I are so proud to help make this happen for you." Something in his phrasing caught my attention. I maintained my smile while asking casually, "Oh, did you help them with the move?" Dad exchanged glances with Mom before responding with unmistakable pride. "We did more than that. We provided the down payment, $156,000, to make sure they got into their dream neighborhood." The green bean casserole suddenly lost all flavor in my mouth as I calculated the magnitude of this revelation. That amount represented more than half of what I had personally saved after years of disciplined financial planning. My expression must have betrayed my shock, because Mom quickly added, "It was from our retirement fund, but family comes first." I somehow managed to maintain composure through dessert, mechanically complimenting Mom's pumpkin pie while processing this new information. After dinner, when Darren and his family departed to put their overtired children to bed, I found myself alone with my parents in the living room, the ancient grandfather clock ticking loudly in the uncomfortable silence. With careful neutrality, I asked, "That was incredibly generous of you to help Darren with his house. If I decided to buy property in Seattle in the future, would you consider helping me as well?" The question hung in the air for several seconds before Dad shifted forward in his recliner, his expression a mixture of confusion and dismissal. "Mason, your situation is completely different," he began in his authoritative tone. "You are too ambitious for a woman. All this career focus is fine for now, but eventually you will need to settle down with a husband who can provide for you. Buying property on your own sends the wrong message." I blinked, genuinely stunned. "Dad, what are you talking about?" "I am a man. I have always been a man," Mom interjected with her placating voice. "We know you are biologically male, dear, but with your lifestyle choices we assumed you would take on the more feminine role in a relationship." My parents had known I was gay since college. While they never fully embraced this aspect of my identity, their reaction now revealed something far more disturbing than simple homophobia. They had mentally recast me in their traditional gender narrative, placing me in the feminine role to make sense of my identity within their rigid worldview. "Dad, that is not how relationships work for anyone, gay or straight," I explained, struggling to keep frustration from my voice. "Modern couples share responsibilities based on individual strengths and preferences, not outdated gender roles." Dad waved his hand dismissively. "Your generation overthinks everything. In any relationship, someone needs to be the husband and someone needs to be the wife. Nature intended it that way." "This conversation is completely inappropriate," I responded, feeling heat rise in my face. "My sexual orientation has nothing to do with gender roles or property ownership." Mom placed her hand on my knee in what she surely thought was a comforting gesture. "We just want what is best for you. Finding a nice man to take care of you would be much better than stretching yourself thin with mortgage payments." I stood up, needing physical distance. "All these years I have been sending you $300 monthly to help with expenses. That is $3,600 annually. That could have gone toward my own home savings." Dad straightened up, his expression hardening. "And we appreciate that support. That is what family does. They help each other. Your brother has children to provide for." The implication was crystal clear. My financial contributions to my parents were expected despite the blatant favoritism toward my brother. My value in the family economy was as a provider of supplemental income, not as a recipient of parental support or investment. I made my excuses shortly afterward, claiming jet lag, and retreated to my childhood bedroom. The space remained frozen. In time, my high school debate trophies gathering dust, while Darren's football memorabilia occupied the prominent display case in the hallway. I spent the night staring at the ceiling, processing the depth of inequity that had defined my family relationship for decades. My flight back to Seattle the following morning was a blur of conflicting emotions. The landscape below transitioned from the flat Midwest to the mountainous West Coast, a physical manifestation of the psychological distance I needed to establish from the family that had consistently undervalued me despite my achievements and contributions. 30,000 feet above the changing American landscape, I found myself mentally cataloging the long history of financial disparity between Darren and me. The house down payment was merely the most recent and egregious example of a pattern established long ago. When Darren turned 16, my parents presented him with a 3-year-old Toyota Camry, complete with insurance coverage and a gas card. They explained it was necessary for his sports commitments and social development. 2 years later, when I reached the same milestone, Dad informed me that if I wanted a car, I should save for it myself. I spent weekends and summers working at the local grocery store, eventually purchasing a 15-year-old Honda Civic that broke down regularly repairs, coming from my own pocket, while Darren received free maintenance at Dad's trusted mechanic. College presented even starker contrasts. Beyond tuition, my parents fully funded Darren's apartment near campus, furnished it completely, provided a monthly allowance for food and entertainment, and never questioned his spending habits even when he took a spontaneous spring break trip to Cancun that cost nearly $2,000. Meanwhile, I lived in cramped dormitory housing all 4 years, working part-time at the campus bookstore, to the library, and occasionally taking paid note-taking positions for large lecture classes. My meals consisted primarily of dining hall food supplemented with ramen noodles when funds ran particularly low. Spring breaks were spent picking up extra shifts rather than lounging on beaches. When Darren married Amy shortly after graduation, my parents contributed $50,000 toward their wedding, a lavish affair at one of Chicago's premier hotel ballrooms with 200 guests and an open bar. Mom spent months coordinating with a professional wedding planner, selecting everything from custom invitations to elaborate floral arrangements. In contrast, when I celebrated my 30th birthday with a small dinner party organized by my close friends, my parents sent a generic card that arrived 3 days late. There was no gift, no special acknowledgement of the milestone, and they declined my invitation to visit Seattle for the occasion, citing the inconvenience of travel. Yet the financial expectations ran in one direction only. When Dad needed a heart procedure 5 years ago that insurance only partially covered, I immediately offered assistance, sending $4,000 without hesitation. This evolved into the monthly support payments that continued even as my own financial goals remained deferred. 3 years ago, when their 20-year-old furnace failed during a particularly harsh Chicago winter, I contributed $7,000 toward the replacement. Darren, who lived 20 minutes away and earned a comfortable income, contributed nothing, explaining he had just purchased a new SUV and was stretched thin. Last Christmas, Mom called specifically to request money for a new refrigerator, bypassing even the pretense of asking Darren first. When I gently questioned this, she explained, "You know your brother has the children to think about. We would never want to take away from our grandchildren." My therapist, Dr. Patterson, had been helping me recognize these patterns for the past 2 years. Our weekly sessions initially focused on my anxiety and workaholic tendencies, but gradually revealed the deeper family dynamics at play. She introduced terms like golden child and scapegoat that initially seemed too dramatic, but increasingly fit the reality of my family structure with uncomfortable precision. Your continued financial support of your parents, while receiving nothing in return, reinforces an unhealthy dynamic she had noted during our session just weeks before Thanksgiving. They have come to expect your resources without reciprocity. What would happen if you redirected that support toward your own well-being? I had always justified my contributions through a sense of filial duty, cultural expectations, and genuine concern for my parents, aging without adequate resources. But the house down payment revelation forced me to confront a painful truth: I was subsidizing a system of favoritism that consistently devalued me while elevating my brother. 2 specific childhood memories surfaced during that reflective flight back to Seattle. At 10 years old, I had won the regional science fair with a project on renewable energy, earning recognition from local news and an invitation to the state competition. My parents attended the award ceremony, but left immediately afterward, explaining they needed to reach Darren's basketball game on time. My blue ribbon was placed in a drawer while Darren's participation trophies occupied the living room mantel. The second memory came from high school graduation. As valedictorian, I delivered the commencement address, a speech I had worked on for weeks. Afterward, during the family celebration at a local restaurant, Dad spent most of the evening discussing Darren's upcoming college football prospects with relatives, while my academic achievement warranted only passing mention. I had attempted several times over the years to discuss the disparity in treatment. Each conversation followed the same pattern: initial dismissal of my perception, followed by justifications about different needs, concluding with subtle accusations of jealousy or ingratitude. The discussions always ended with me apologizing for raising the issue, reinforcing the narrative that the problem lay in my perspective, not their behavior. By the time our plane began its descent into Seattle, I had reached a clarity that had eluded me for decades. The favoritism was never going to end. The financial inequity would continue and likely increase as my parents aged. And most importantly, I held the power to change my participation in this dysfunctional system. The monthly payments that had become an expected tribute could end with a single decision. My financial future no longer needed to be sacrificed on the altar of parental approval I would never fully receive. The Seattle skyline welcomed me home with its familiar Space Needle silhouette against the gray November sky. My apartment, though modest, by some standards felt like a sanctuary after the emotional turbulence of the Thanksgiving visit. I dropped my suitcase by the door and immediately called Kevin, my best friend since college, and the person who knew the unfiltered version of my family history. I spilled everything about the house down payment and the bizarre gender role confusion from my parents. Kevin listened without interruption, his silence broken only by occasional sounds of disbelief. "That is beyond messed up, Mason," he finally responded when I finished my account. "The money thing alone would be bad enough, but the gender confusion stuff takes it to another level. What are you going to do?" "I need to stop the payments," I said, voicing aloud the decision that had crystallized during my flight. "But there is something I have not told you, or them. I have actually been preparing for this moment for months." The truth was, my financial distancing had begun long before the Thanksgiving revelation. 6 months earlier, after a particularly pointed therapy session about financial boundaries, I had begun systematically reducing my dependence on parental approval. The first step involved creating a separate savings account my parents knew nothing about. While continuing the expected $300 monthly payments, I had been depositing an additional $500 monthly into this secret fund, earmarked specifically for my future home purchase. The account had grown steadily, supplemented by performance bonuses and careful budgeting. I had also been working quietly with Tanya, a real estate agent, recommended by colleagues exploring the Seattle market for properties that would fit my budget and lifestyle. We had viewed numerous condominiums and townhouses, focusing on locations that would offer reasonable commutes to work while providing the urban amenities I valued. 3 weeks before Thanksgiving, we had found a promising prospect, a 2-bedroom condominium in a converted historic building in Capitol Hill, walking distance to restaurants, parks, and public transportation. The property needed cosmetic updates, but had excellent bones, as Tanya described it, with high ceilings, original hardwood floors, and large windows, offering partial views of downtown. I had submitted a preliminary offer the day before leaving for Chicago, not telling anyone in my family about this significant step. The timing now seemed almost prescient, as if some part of me had anticipated the breaking point that Thanksgiving would bring. The Monday after returning from Chicago, I received the call from Tanya that changed everything. "They accepted your offer, Mason," she exclaimed, "with the condition that we close within 45 days. Can you make that work?" A strange calm settled over me as I confirmed my commitment to the purchase. I spent the following week securing financing, scheduling inspections, and beginning the meticulous process of becoming a homeowner entirely on my own terms. Each signature on the mounting paperwork felt like reclaiming a piece of my independence. Dr. Patterson helped me process these rapid changes during our next therapy session. The small, comfortable office with its view of Puget Sound had become a space of truth-telling and growth over the previous 2 years. "This property purchase represents more than just a financial investment," she noted as I described the condominium and my plans for renovations. "It is a concrete step toward establishing your identity separate from your family expectations." "I feel guilty and empowered simultaneously," I admitted, "like I am both betraying them and finally being true to myself." "Those feelings are natural when redefining long-standing family dynamics," she assured me. "The guilt comes from challenging their narrative about your role. The empowerment comes from creating your own narrative." We developed strategies for the inevitable confrontation that would come when I informed my parents about ending the monthly financial support. Dr. Patterson emphasized the importance of clarity, calmness, and consistency in communicating this boundary. That opportunity came sooner than expected. 2 weeks before Christmas, my mother called with her customary affected cheerfulness that typically preceded financial requests. "Mason, dear," she began after brief pleasantries, "your father and I are looking at our heating bills for this winter, and they are going to be much higher than expected. We were hoping you might be able to increase your monthly help, just temporarily, of course. Perhaps $500 instead of $300 until spring." The familiar surge of obligation rose automatically, the conditioned response to put their needs before my own. But this time, something different happened. I thought about the condominium waiting for me, the future I was building, and the pattern of inequity I was finally confronting. "Actually, Mom," I replied, keeping my voice steady, "I wanted to talk to you about that. I will not be continuing the monthly payments after December." The silence that followed was profound, broken only by her sharp intake of breath. "What do you mean?" she finally asked, her voice pitched higher than normal. "We rely on that money, Mason. Your father is retired, and our fixed income only stretches so far." "I understand that must be difficult," I said, using the neutral language Dr. Patterson and I had practiced. "However, I need to focus on my own financial future now. I have financial goals that require my full resources." "Is this because of what your father said at Thanksgiving?" Mom asked, her tone shifting to one I recognized as the beginning of emotional manipulation. "He did not mean anything by it. You know how he is with his old-fashioned ways." "This is not about one comment," I explained. "This is about a pattern that has existed for years. Darren received $156,000 for his house, while I have been expected to provide financial support rather than receive it. That disparity speaks for itself." The conversation deteriorated from there, with my mother cycling through various emotional appeals: guilt over their aging struggles, reminders of their sacrifices during my childhood, implications that I was abandoning family duty, and finally, thinly veiled threats about how this decision would affect my relationship with the entire family. I held firm, repeating the simple boundary that after December the payments would end. When she demanded to know what financial emergency necessitated this change, I chose not to reveal my home purchase. That information would come later when I was ready, and on my terms. The call ended with my mother in tears and my heart racing, but my resolve remained intact. Within minutes, my father called back, his authoritative voice booming through the speaker. "What is this nonsense your mother tells me?" he demanded without preamble. "You are cutting off your support payments after everything we have done for you." The conversation with my father followed a predictable pattern: his assertion of patriarchal authority, dismissal of my perspective, and eventual ultimatum that I would regret damaging our relationship over money. I maintained the boundary with as much respect as I could muster, ending the call when it became clearly unproductive. That evening, alone in my apartment, surrounded by packing boxes and paint samples for my new home, I experienced both grief and relief. The family dynamic that had shaped my life was crumbling, but from its ruins, something new and healthier was emerging. My phone buzzed repeatedly with messages from both parents, and eventually Darren. But I allowed myself the grace of silence, focusing instead on the future I was building, one decision at a time. The 2 weeks following my boundary-setting phone call with my parents could only be described as digital siege warfare. My phone filled with increasingly desperate voice messages from Mom, alternating between tearful pleas and passive-aggressive guilt trips. Dad opted for shorter, more authoritarian communications, his voice messages rarely exceeding 30 seconds but packed with phrases like family obligation and ungrateful behavior. Darren predictably entered the fray as parental enforcement. His initial message dripped with condescension. "What the hell, Mason," he began without greeting. "Mom is practically having a nervous breakdown because you suddenly decided they are not worth $300 a month. Is your fancy Seattle lifestyle so important that you need to abandon our parents?" I did not immediately respond to any of these communications, following Dr. Patterson's advice to give myself space to process emotions before engaging. Instead, I focused on the positive developments in my life. The home inspection on my condominium came back with only minor issues. The mortgage approval process proceeded smoothly, and I began selecting fixtures and paint colors for the renovations I planned to complete before moving in. Kevin and my close circle of friends provided invaluable support during this turbulent period. They helped me pack my apartment belongings on weekends, offered design suggestions for the new space, and most importantly, validated my decision to establish healthy boundaries with my family. As Christmas approached, the traditional expectation of my return to Chicago loomed large. I made the difficult decision to remain in Seattle, sending brief civil texts to inform my parents I would not be joining them for the holiday. This announcement triggered another wave of emotional communications, including a particularly manipulative voice message from Mom. "I guess we are not important enough for you to visit anymore," she said, her voice trembling. "Your father and I are getting older, Mason. We might not have many Christmases left, but I suppose your new independence is more important than family." The calculated nature of this emotional appeal was not lost on me. The implication that setting financial boundaries equated to abandoning aging parents represented exactly the kind of manipulation Dr. Patterson had warned about. After careful consideration and consultation with my therapist, I proposed a video call with my entire family the Sunday before Christmas. This would allow for a conversation about the changing dynamics, without the pressure of in-person interaction. To my mild surprise, they agreed. The call began awkwardly with strained greetings and pointed comments about my absence from the holiday gathering. Mom appeared to have been crying. Dad maintained his stern countenance, and Darren sat with arms crossed, Amy hovering nervously in the background. "I appreciate you all making time for this conversation." I began, maintaining the calm, measured tone I had practiced. I wanted to explain my decision about the monthly payments and clear up any misunderstandings. "There is nothing to misunderstand," Dad interrupted. "You have decided your money is more important than helping your parents. End of story." "That is not accurate or fair," I countered. "For years I have contributed financially while Darren has received significant financial assistance. The house down payment is just the most recent example." Mom interjected. That is completely different. Your brother has a family to support. And I have my future to build, I responded. The disparity in how you have treated us financially goes back to our childhood. Darren received a car at 16. I had to buy my own. His college was fully funded. I worked multiple jobs while studying. His wedding received $50,000 from you. I received belated birthday cards. You are just jealous of your brother, Dad said dismissively. Always have been. This is not about jealousy, I explained. This is about equity and respect. I have built my career and savings entirely on my own, while simultaneously supporting you financially. Meanwhile, you gave Darren $156,000 for a house down payment while telling me I am too ambitious for a woman and should focus on finding a husband. Amy gasped audibly at this revelation, suggesting Darren might not have shared the full context of our Thanksgiving conversation with his wife. Your father did not mean it that way, Mom insisted. He just wants you to find happiness. By reinforcing outdated gender stereotypes and treating me as less deserving of support than my brother, I asked. That is not promoting happiness, that is enforcing inequality. Darren leaned forward, his expression darkening. If you cut off Mom and Dad, do not expect any relationship with me or your niece and nephew either. Family stands together. Is that what you were doing when they needed a new furnace, and I paid $7,000 while you contributed? Nothing, I asked, maintaining a calm tone despite the escalating tension. Or when Dad needed heart surgery and I covered expenses that insurance would not. Where was your standing together with family then? The confrontation continued to escalate, with accusations and counter-accusations flying across the digital divide. Dad eventually issued what he clearly considered his trump card. If you go through with this, you are no longer our son, he declared, his face flushed with anger. Family means supporting each other, not abandoning your parents when they need you. I took a deep breath before responding. I agree that family means supporting each other. But support should flow in multiple directions, not just from me to you while Darren receives constant financial assistance. That is not family, that is exploitation. Mom began crying again while Darren launched into a tirade about my selfishness. When the conversation devolved into unproductive emotional manipulation, I decided it was time for the revelation I had been saving. There is something else you should know, I said, when there was finally a break in the barrage. I have purchased my own home. I close on a condominium in Seattle next week. The announcement landed like a bomb, momentarily silencing everyone on the other end of the video call. Dad's expression shifted from anger to shock. Mom stopped crying mid-sob, and Darren's mouth literally hung open. You bought a place, Mom finally asked. Without telling us? Yes, I did. On my own, without the family support Darren received. I have been planning this for months, saving carefully while still maintaining the monthly payments to you. Dad seemed personally offended by my independence. You should have discussed this with us first. Real estate is a major commitment. Just like you discussed Darren's down payment with me, I asked pointedly. The call ended shortly thereafter with no resolution but a new reality established. I was claiming my independence financially and emotionally, and my family was being forced to reckon with the consequences of their long-established patterns. Instead of the traditional Chicago Christmas, I spent the holiday with my chosen family. Kevin hosted a dinner for our friend group, complete with thoughtfully selected gifts and genuine celebration of my new home purchase. The contrast between the warm acceptance of my friends and the conditional love of my biological family could not have been starker. New Year's Eve found me in my apartment, surrounded by packed boxes ready for the impending move. As midnight approached, I stood by my window watching fireworks illuminate the Space Needle, reflecting on the tumultuous year ending and the new beginning awaiting me. The pain of family conflict mixed with the anticipation of fresh start, a bittersweet cocktail of emotions that felt appropriately complex for the significant transition underway in my life. January 7th marked my official move into the Capitol Hill condominium. The closing process had proceeded smoothly, despite the holiday timing, and I received the keys with a sense of accomplishment that transcended the typical first-time homeowner pride. This space represented not just a financial investment but a declaration of independence. The condominium itself was everything I had hoped for: original hardwood floors that needed refinishing, high ceilings with elegant crown molding, and windows that filled the space with natural light, even on Seattle's notorious gray days. The previous owner's dated design choices, peach, bathroom, tile, and forest green kitchen cabinets would need addressing, but the bones of the place felt solid and welcoming. Kevin and our friend group turned the moving process into a celebration, forming a human chain to transport boxes from the rented truck up to my second-floor unit. By evening, we collapsed on my mismatched furniture arranged haphazardly in the living room, toasting with pizza and beer, to what Kevin dubbed Mason's liberation pad. For those initial weeks, I immersed myself in making the space my own, a welcome distraction from the family turmoil that continued to simmer in the background. I refinished the hardwood floors myself, spending weekends sanding and staining until the oak planks gleamed with warm honey tones. The kitchen cabinets I painted a clean white, replacing outdated hardware with brushed nickel that complemented the new stainless steel appliances I splurged on. Each modification to the space felt symbolic, repurposing what was functionally sound but aesthetically outdated into something that reflected my personal style and needs. The master bedroom became a calming retreat with walls painted a soft blue-gray. The second bedroom transformed into a home office where I could occasionally work remotely. Throughout this period of physical transformation, the emotional landscape remained challenging. My parents continued their campaign of communication, though the tone shifted from anger to calculated concern. Mom sent texts that began with phrases like, "We are worried about you," or "This estrangement is affecting your father's health." Dad occasionally left gruff voice messages asking when I was going to come to my senses. Darren opted for more direct confrontation, sending lengthy emails detailing how my actions were tearing the family apart and causing undue stress to our aging parents. He portrayed himself as the responsible son shouldering the emotional burden of my selfish behavior, conveniently omitting any mention of the financial disparity that had precipitated the conflict. Following Dr. Patterson's guidance, I established clear communication boundaries. I did not block my family contacts completely, but limited my engagement to brief, factual responses once weekly, avoiding the emotional hooks embedded in their messages. This measured approach protected my mental health, while preventing the total severance of family ties that might prove difficult to repair later. The harassment reached a peak in February when my parents apparently enlisted extended family members in their campaign. Cousins I had not spoken with in years suddenly sent messages expressing concern about the family rift. An uncle called to suggest I should be more understanding of my parents' traditional values. Even my maternal grandmother, who rarely involved herself in family conflicts, sent a handwritten letter urging reconciliation. This coordinated pressure campaign had an unintended consequence. It clarified which family members respected my autonomy and which viewed me primarily through my role in the established family system. I found unexpected support from my Aunt Linda, my mother's younger sister, who reached out with a perspective that validated my experience. "Your parents always played favorites, Mason," she admitted during a phone call that stretched late into the evening. "I saw it when you were growing up, but felt it wasn't my place to interfere. I regret that now. Standing up for yourself isn't wrong, regardless of what they're saying to the rest of the family." This validation from within the family system provided a powerful counter-narrative to the story my parents were spreading. Aunt Linda became an occasional ally, not by taking sides in family disputes, but by consistently acknowledging the reality of the dynamics at play. Professional developments added positive momentum to this period of transition. In March, I received a promotion to senior software architect, a role that came with increased responsibility, creative freedom, and a substantial salary increase. The professional recognition reinforced my confidence in the path I had chosen, providing external validation that contrasted sharply with my family's dismissal of my career ambitions. Perhaps the most unexpected development during this period came from a housewarming gathering. Kevin insisted on organizing in April. Among the guests was James, a landscape architect Kevin knew from graduate school. Tall with auburn hair and a quiet confidence, James and I found ourselves deep in conversation about everything from Seattle's urban planning challenges to our shared love of mid-century modern design. The connection felt immediately different from previous relationships, intellectual, mutual, and refreshingly straightforward. When James asked me to dinner the following weekend, it felt like a natural progression rather than a calculated next step. Our relationship developed gradually over shared meals, museum visits, and eventually his professional input on creating a container garden for my small condominium balcony. What struck me most about this developing relationship was its fundamental equality. James and I naturally shared responsibilities based on our interests and strengths, without prescribed roles or expectations. When I eventually shared the bizarre Thanksgiving conversation about gender roles with him, his incredulous laughter was both validating and healing. "That is not how any relationship works. Gay or straight," he said, echoing my own words to my parents. "My parents have been married 40 years, and my dad does all the cooking while my mom handles their investments. They would find your parents' ideas completely alien." 6 months into my self-imposed distance from my immediate family, Aunt Linda visited Seattle. Over dinner at my newly renovated home, she shared updates I had been intentionally avoiding. "Your parents are struggling a bit financially," she admitted, twirling pasta on her fork. "They didn't realize how much they had come to depend on your monthly contributions." The information triggered an immediate wave of guilt, followed by the recognition that this reaction was exactly what my family would have counted on to maintain the previous dynamic. "They have retirement income and a fully paid-off house," I noted. "And Darren lives 20 minutes away. They are not destitute, they are just experiencing the consequences of their financial choices." Aunt Linda nodded thoughtfully. "Darren has been forced to step up a bit, which is probably overdue. He drives them to appointments now and has them over for dinner weekly. There has been some growth there, though he would never admit it." She also shared that my brother had begun seeing a therapist of his own, ostensibly to deal with the stress of the family conflict, but increasingly confronting his own role in the dysfunctional family system. "He mentioned to me that his therapist asked some uncomfortable questions about why he accepted such disproportionate financial help from your parents," Linda said. "I think he is starting to see things differently, even if he is not ready to acknowledge it to you." This information provided unexpected hope that the painful rupture might eventually lead to healthier family dynamics, not through my capitulation to the established system, but through others beginning to recognize and address its fundamental imbalance. 1 year after the fateful Thanksgiving revelation, my life had transformed in ways both visible and invisible. My condominium had evolved from a renovation project to a true home filled with carefully selected furniture artwork from local Seattle artists and the container garden James had helped design for the balcony. The physical space reflected the internal changes, a growing confidence in my own judgment, appreciation for beauty, on my own terms, and the security that comes from creating a sanctuary entirely your own. My career continued to flourish, with the senior architect role providing both creative fulfillment and financial stability. The team I led had successfully launched a major project that received industry recognition, validating my professional capabilities in a public forum. The increased income allowed me to maximize retirement contributions, while still enjoying Seattle's cultural offerings and occasional weekend trips to explore the Pacific Northwest with James. Our relationship had deepened over the months, moving from initial attraction to a partnership based on mutual respect, shared values, and genuine enjoyment of each other's company. We maintained separate residences by choice, valuing independence, while creating a relationship that supported, rather than consumed, our individual identities. The contrast between this healthy dynamic and the codependent model my parents had tried to impose could not have been more striking. The journey with my family had taken unexpected turns as well. After 9 months of limited contact, I had cautiously agreed to resume communication on more regular terms, with clear boundaries established about acceptable topics and behaviors. The monthly financial support remained firmly in the past, a boundary I maintained despite occasional hints from my mother about their financial challenges. Dr. Patterson and I continued our weekly sessions, focusing less on crisis management and more on long-term emotional health and relationship building. She noted the significant progress in my ability to distinguish between genuine guilt and conditioned responses to family pressure, a distinction that proved crucial in maintaining healthy boundaries. In October, almost a year to the day from the previous Thanksgiving disaster, I received an unexpected email from my father. The brief message, characteristically short on emotional language, invited me to visit Chicago at my convenience. The absence of demands or guilt triggers represented a small but significant shift in his approach. After careful consideration and discussion with Dr. Patterson, I arranged a brief 2-day visit during a business trip to the Midwest. The initial reunion was awkward, with Mom cycling between excessive cheerfulness and barely concealed anxiety, while Dad maintained a gruff formality. The breakthrough came unexpectedly during a private moment in the backyard where Dad had gone to check his long-standing tomato garden. I joined him, remembering how, as a child, I had enjoyed helping with this particular project, while Darren showed no interest in gardening. "Your mother and I have been seeing a counselor," Dad said abruptly, not making eye contact as he inspected a tomato plant. "Pastor William suggested it after we kept bringing up family issues in our monthly meetings with him." The admission clearly cost him considerable pride, making the next statement even more significant. "I may have been unfair in how I treated you and your brother differently." He continued, his voice rough with unaccustomed emotion. "The counselor helped me see some patterns I was not aware of." This was not a full apology or complete acknowledgement of the decades of favoritism, but from a man of his generation and temperament, it represented a monumental concession. I responded, simply thanking him for sharing that with me and expressing hope that the counseling was helpful. Mom's evolution came in smaller, more tentative steps. During that same visit, she refrained from making comments about my career being a placeholder until marriage, instead asking genuine questions about my projects and responsibilities. She mentioned that she had joined a book club at the suggestion of their counselor, expanding her social circle beyond family and church connections for the first time in decades. The most surprising development came from my brother. Darren had initially maintained his role as parental defender, but his own therapy journey had begun to crack the facade of family unity he had long presented. When we spoke privately during my visit, he admitted to feeling increasing discomfort about the financial disparity in how our parents had treated us. "I always knew they gave me more," he acknowledged as we sat in his kitchen while his wife and children were visiting her parents. "But I told myself it was because I stayed local and helped them out. Your therapist comment made me think about things differently." He shared that his own counseling had revealed patterns of dependency he had never recognized, ways in which accepting disproportionate financial support had kept him tethered to our parents' approval and expectations. While our relationship remained tentative, this moment of genuine self-reflection opened the possibility of a more authentic connection in the future. These small steps toward family healing did not erase the past or instantly create the supportive family system I had longed for throughout my life. Instead, they offered something perhaps more valuable: the opportunity to build new relationships with these familiar people based on who we were becoming, rather than the roles we had historically played. Back in Seattle, in the home I had created for myself, I reflected on the complex journey of the past year with a sense of hard-won peace. The most important lessons had less to do with family dynamics specifically, and more to do with universal truths about human worth and relationships. True independence requires both financial self-sufficiency and emotional boundaries. My career success provided the former, while therapy helped establish the latter. Love that comes with conditions is not really love at all. It is a transaction. Recognizing this painful truth allowed me to stop trying to earn affection that should have been freely given. Chosen family can provide the unconditional support that biological relationships sometimes fail to deliver. Kevin James and my circle of friends had demonstrated this repeatedly throughout the difficult year. Standing up for yourself is not selfishness, it is self-preservation. Despite my family's attempts to characterize boundary setting as abandonment, it was actually the healthiest choice for everyone involved. Breaking toxic cycles requires someone willing to endure the discomfort of change. By refusing to perpetuate the established pattern, I had created space for new and healthier dynamics to potentially emerge. Most importantly, I learned that while we cannot control how others treat us, we have complete agency in how we respond and what we accept. The story of our lives is not written solely by our circumstances, but by our choices within those circumstances. As I look toward the future, I do so with cautious optimism about my family relationships. The complete healing of decades of dysfunctional patterns remains uncertain, but the possibility exists in a way it never could have if I had continued participating in the established system. For myself, the path forward is clearer. I will continue building a life based on authentic values rather than inherited expectations. My relationship with James will evolve according to our mutual choices, not prescribed roles. My home will remain a sanctuary of self-determination, and most importantly, I will extend to others the unconditional acceptance I once desperately sought from my family. Have you ever had to set difficult boundaries with family members who didn't treat you fairly? How did you handle the guilt and pressure they might have put on you? I found that standing firm on your values while still keeping communication open can lead to healing over time. If my story resonated with you, please like this video, subscribe to hear more personal journeys, and share with someone who might need to know they're not alone in facing family favoritism. Thank you for listening to my story. And remember that creating your own path doesn't mean giving up on family. It means building healthier relationships based on mutual respect.